Welcome, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, thank you. Okay, that's me. It's quite weird seeing your face on a big screen. It's just like, oh, that's me. Of course it's me. So, yeah, thank you for taking time this morning. I've had a fantastic morning so far. My talk is called Human Decentered Design, and I'm going to be speaking about lots of things in very quick succession. Don't worry if you miss anything. If you go on my Instagram, UXMichaelCO, you'll find a link to my link tree, and you can download the slide deck right now if you want to. Now, before I move into the detail of what I'm going to do, I always like to take a moment to acknowledge the writers and the artist researchers who inspire my thinking and my vision, and I do that for a number of reasons. Well, first of all, it's just to help you, or invite you to pick a name you don't know on the screen and investigate their work, because I can guarantee you it'll be very enriching to all of you. Secondly, I'll do this as a way of just acknowledging that we all work collectively. We've heard lots of people talking in very different ways about collectivity, community, and I think this is a way of acknowledging that I'm on the stage, but actually this is a product of lots of people's work who've come before me. The video you see on screen is called Wakisa. It's by an American artist called Alison Janae Hamilton, and in 2021, this video was projected in Times Square, and it's actually a video of a river taken in North Florida, and it's her way of acknowledging the channels that were built by the enslaved many centuries ago for transporting cotton, enslaved people who picked cotton. And in the spirit of Wakisa, what I want to do is to use this video as a way of thinking about how we contend with geological, ecological, and technological stories from the past and affecting how that affects our present. And also acknowledging the way that racial and geological traumas really impact our lives today. So like all great trilogies, my talk has got 4 points. It originally did start with 3 points, but I wedged another one in. So first of all, I'm going to talk about soil. I'm going to think about how we look down and reconsider our relation with the earth. Second, I'm going to talk about self and think about how we look inwards and just ask who gets recognized as a designer and where creativity takes place. Third, I'm going to talk about signals and really start to look critically at the narrative of climate justice, particularly the narrative of climate justice without liberation. And fourth, we're going to look at the sky and just think about how we can adopt new perspectives for realizing pluralistic futures. Soil. So From Mars to Venus is a dual aspect video by a researcher called Dr. Ignacio Acosta. And in this video, projected in two parallel images or two parallel video streams, we see the impact of climate damage in two very different parts of the world. To the left is the Atacama Desert in Chile, and it's been inhabited for many thousands of years, but it's also one of the driest places on Earth. And in this place, many minerals are being extracted even today, copper, particularly lithium now, as so many people want to build electric vehicles and that sort of thing. To the right, as you can see, is a town called Kiruna in the very north part of Sweden, very close to the Arctic, very close to the Arctic Circle. And even there, iron mining is really disrupting the well-being of the indigenous Sami people and the reindeer that they rely on, and those kinds of things. So these two very far apart places are tethered together by the environmental cost of the green transition. And I start in these distant places as a way of echoing the disconnection that we may feel. We talk about the environment in many different abstract and very real terms, but oftentimes the subjects we're grappling feel so far away from us. Now our tools may be, I'm a technologist, we don't necessarily work with drills and shovels, so it's not always clear to perceive the legacies of human-centered economies and activity and how they can be equally destructive as well. Staying with the Atacama Desert in Chile, this is another shot from there. It's not also talking about what we take out from the earth, it's what we dump and put into the earth. And this is a place within the Atacama Desert where lots of clothes, particularly fast fashion and these kind of very disposable clothes, end up in these open air dumps. So our human-centered age produces many things. It produces habitat destruction, desertification, drought, and many other effects like that. So I always like to encourage us to be skeptical of the answers that represent solutions that thrive on inequality, and those quick fixes that may appear to be appealing at first often hide many dangers or damages of labour and income inequality. So if we're to imagine liberatory futures, we should also confront the ideas that govern the business of extractive technologies. Now, the business of technology, I'm always thinking about this, it's very isolating because it often removes us from the labour that produces the products that we have in our hands and the systems that govern them. It also centralises, and we use phones and lots of other computerised technology, but so much of this rests on centralised large-scale data, which is very extractive as well. But we've been here before because in the age of colonial expansion, forests were felled to make way for monocultures, land was seized under the doctrine of terra nullius, and biological diversity was eliminated to make sure that land was used at its most extreme of efficiencies. So it's these plantation logics that sacrifice life at the altar of efficiency to maximise profit. Now, before we imagine brighter futures, I like to think of people who think in similar ways to me, and I center myself both as black subject and black object, and this researcher who really inspires me, Emma Josephine Budge, writes this, and she says that to think of the relationship between black subjectivity and the modern human is fraught with histories of colonial violence, increasingly harsh climates, and the haunting dispossession of lands, life, and lifeways. So when you say soil, I want us to say or think that I want us to be reminded that we should be feeling the geological and racial traumas of the past that's literally beneath our feet. And I also want us to think and be critical of the erasure enacted by universal technology utopias. So let's put that into practical terms. You can say, well, actually, I'm going to tell the origin stories of the technologies that I work with from the furthest ends of the earth right into the palm of my hand. Self. So who gets recognised as a designer? Now, I've spent many years working in lots of different companies, some big, some small, and maybe you might work in an office that looks a little bit like this. And when you say the word design or designer, we have a very clear idea of where this takes place and who does this kind of activity. Now, I like to get into the history and the origin of lots of things, and actually what we think and perceive as design has very close links to European modernism, and many European modernist ideals were often concerned with what's called eliminating the ornament. And one particular writer, Adolf Loos, who was a theorist, an Austrian theorist in the early 20th century, wrote a lot about this. So really what he's doing through his theorizing of design was showing how colonial expressions of technological sophistication could be expressed in cultural artifacts. And doing that, it's a way of showing that how primitive Afro-descendant peoples could be improved by good design. So that aesthetic you see on your screen in our homes is kind of linking back to this idea of European modernism. And we look into nature, and this idea of the golden ratio is a mathematical principle that governs lots of what we recognize in the natural environment and also built environment, is often very closely associated with European sophistication, particularly how white European culture is visually codified, reproduced, and disseminated. Now, if you talk about design and aesthetics in a depoliticized and dehistoricized sense, you lose this because it's very difficult to recognize and see this in other cultural forms. So this idea of the golden ratio, there's a really fantastic article I read a couple of years ago called The African Roots of Swift Design that goes into this in a lot of detail and looking at how many artifacts and built buildings in historical African cultures represents and actually shows this, which is really important because when you think of where these things originate, it kind of redraws how you perceive the world around you. Oh, yeah. Okay. So to descend to the human, first of all, it helps us to ask the question, it helps us to grapple with the cultural and ethnic violence that has been enabled by a single aesthetic to become ubiquitous to the point of invisibility, but also redraws the boundaries of who gets recognized as a designer and where design takes place. And to think beyond this, I want to give you a little bit of an example and talk about Afro hair braiding. Now, this might be it might be a little bit of a strange swerve, but it's actually really important because Afro hair braiding refutes European modernist colonial ideas that African societies failed to preserve knowledge and its people lacking technological proficiency. Now think about it, centuries-old braiding styles embodied complex algorithms expressed in hair, mentally retained by stylists using fractals and recursions. So this idea of infinity mathematically expressed in hair braiding styles. So braids are testament to how orally transmitted data can retain their integrity. And actually the irony is digital technology has a very big problem with retaining the integrity of data, even over 20 to 30 or even 40 years. So who is recognized as a designer, and where does design take place? Now, algorithmic platforms, we think of these huge systems. It's a very big concept, but I like to think about the microscopic as well. So in this book, Aeropolis, by the writer and researcher, Dr. Neria Calvillo, she writes about air particles and the human body in relation to the air that surrounds us, using queer theory and lots of other really important ideas. So it's just as important to pay as much attention to the big as well as to the tiny. Now, I went to this event called the Court for Intergenerational Climate Crimes in London a couple of months ago, and it's a series of symposiums, seminars, but also blending art and research to make really important, thought-provoking provocations of our role in the nature and the built environment. Going back to that idea of personhood and who is recognized as a person, it really prompts us to rethink who gets the right to be protected as well. So in many ways, art foreshadows life because they're asking lots of different questions in a much more of an interrogatory and provocative way, more so than we find in the technology industry, which is where I do most of my work. Now, this other book, which has just come out recently, published by a group of researchers in Belgium called Decentering Design, we talk about the human, and actually when you think of what a human is, it's really ironic that here I am, but actually most of the human body is mostly water and bacteria. So you're redrawing the idea of who is human, and in this quote, which is really poetic, they talk about how we inhale, we breathe an atmosphere produced by animals, plants, and bacteria and soils that surround us, making them part of our bloodstream. As we exhale, we contribute to the atmosphere that all life depends on. So the boundaries of where humanity begins and ends is really fluid. When I say self, we're looking inwards because who we recognize as designers and the entities we assign personhood to expresses our culturally situated more than human values. So to make that practical, what we can say is we can interrogate, or I will interrogate the origin of my design ideals by rethinking who I call a designer and recognize the many places that creativity already flourishes. Thanks. That wasn't a dramatic pause. I was breathing, so I realized I've been rattling through. I need to. And now it's getting warmer as well, so it's like, I need to breathe. So yeah. Signals. This is part 3. Now, in 2024, there's an artist called Mike Perry. He did this project called Reverse Sod Swap. And what he did, he transplanted a circle of wildflower meadow from an East London park into a field that's grazed by sheep in West Wales. And you can see this circular arrangement of that in the field there that was fenced off. And yeah, it's called Reverse Sod Swap. And it's really a study of human intervention and the degrading impacts of monoculture farming, particularly in Britain's national parks. And it says many things to me, and this is my interpretation, I'm reading into this. The art intervention is a powerful commentary on land, power, and the migration of people and plants. This idea of native and foreign, I mean, the language in and of itself is really interesting and provocative to me, but it raises many questions of these kind of interventions that we make. But I want to think about how we talk about climate justice, because you think of examples of the La Colectiva Feminista en Construcción. They're in Puerto Rico. They've been doing amazingly important work. Para todos, todo, for everyone, everything. And Puerto Rico, as a unincorporated territory of the United States, has a troubled past and present through the way that the finance and punitive debt has been imposed upon it, and they have no representation in the American political system, and the effect of natural disasters on that small island. So this idea of protest and justice, it becomes more important to recognize this. And this book published recently by Joycelyn Longdon called Natural Connection is another really important book to read. So much to go into that, but she makes this link between the role that black feminists, working class women play in resistance, particularly in the tradition of the Combahee River Collective, the Zapatistas, and anti-colonial struggle in Mexico, Black Lives Matter, and many others. This example here is from a protest in North Carolina in the early 1980s with the Warren County PCB protest. This idea of using the body as a source of protest is a really important doctrine that we think and work through even today. The bodies draw attention to the racialized and gendered impact of environmental and climate justice, and I think it's really important to draw those links together. It's important to make that link because economic justice, housing justice, migrant justice, and decolonial justice are all tied so closely together with climate justice. We can't concern ourselves with putting out a fire in a pantry if the whole house continues to burn. So economic justice means thinking beyond a racial capitalist system defined by its need for structural inequality to persist. And housing justice means that we believe that homes are crucial to public health and they're a right, not an asset. Migrant justice rejects border logics and dehumanization of migrants because the body, particularly racialized and gendered bodies, exist at the intersection of many environmental harms. And decolonial justice is concerned with the history and ending the continuance of land dispossession, wherever that is in the world. So when you say signals, signals are distorted when the narrative of climate justice fails to engage with liberation in all its forms. Para todos, todo. How's my Spanish? Okay, I practiced. So I will challenge structural power by aligning my message of climate justice with other forms of struggle: economic, housing, land, and migrant justice. Sky. So there are black people in the future, and this artwork by the artist Alicia B. Walmsley happened a few years ago. It's kind of an ongoing series. And it's an intervention, multi-site, cross-continent artwork that rings loudly. It's been many places around the world. And I like to look at that again and again because it's a call to action. It's a rebuke, but it's also a reminder. Because to imagine better futures means we must be willing to build on the work of those who challenge Western universalism. And the call I see in this artwork is that black people exist not only literally in the now, but as a figurative possibility liberated from current injustice. Now, it's been mentioned I'm a birder. I go out with Flock Together, it's a bird watching group. Started as a way of encouraging people of colour to get into nature, but there's lots of creative work that goes on within that group, and I met Talira and Chantal, many others, Afreen as well, and lots of other friends through that group. We go all over the place. Now, this particular walk we did last year, it was June last year, we went to Footscray Meadow in Bexley. It's on the southeast edge of London, and lots of bird life is there. Now, this clearing you see in the colour, there used to be a stately home there. That's where it got its place from. It burnt down in the early 20th century. And it's quite haunting when you go there, because in this clearing you see lots of birds that have kind of nested in the trees, jackdaws and other things, other species. And those two green blobs you see there, I think those are the two green sort of trees you see looking out from the front of that house. It just reminds me that the roots of human domination are very shallow, and nature can always rewild itself no matter who we think we are and how powerful we think we are in this world. I think of lots of things. So I think of birds and nature, but I also think of technology, big and small. And this compilation or anthology by two University of Cambridge lecturers, Dr. Eleanor Drage and Kerry McInerney, gathered together lots of academics and practitioners to write about technologies. But this particular essay by Jason Edward Lewis talks about rethinking just how we interface with the Western intellectual context, and particularly with challenging us to look and widen our conceptual boundaries. So to finish off this part on Sky, we need to look up. We need to remember that there are black people in the future, reminding us that we must never repeat the erasure or dispossession of indigenous or black peoples. So I will... So I will strive towards pluralistic futures in dialogue with knowledge traditions different from my own. Coda. So just before I end, did you know that TfL operate one of the best free permanent art galleries? It's quite remarkable. When you're on the underground, you're always rushing around. You don't take time to look at these things. But they operate. Every single station on the London Underground has a permanent artwork called Maze. I think it's called Labyrinth. It's like a little maze thing you can look at. It's by an artist, I forget the name. But every single station has got one. Now, in Westminster Station, if you go into the side that's next to Big Ben, you go down the stairs, you'll see this sign here. It's by a Ghanaian artist, British Ghanaian artist called Larry Achiampong. And you notice the colours are different. Now, the colours represent the the Pan-African colours and the symbols that remind us about the centuries-old entanglement between Britain, Africa, and the Caribbean. Red for the blood that has been shed, yellow for the gold, represented from the continent's wealth, and green for the fertile land. So when I come into that station, it just reminds me that I can dare to dream of these liberatory futures. And these are futures in which I have a right to participate, and futures in which you have a right to participate. And I think these are futures in which we all have a right to participate. So just as I come towards the end, we've heard lots about land dispossession and the effects of warfare and conflict. So I want to take a moment just to think about conflict's past, because it's striking to me how the wartime poets of the First World War looked at the environmental impact of war and conflict on the land, how the violence of the past reverberates into the present. And in this poem, which we often hear repeated during World War commemorations, John McCrae talks about looking into the sky, the larks still bravely singing, and they fly scarce heard amid the guns below. So I'll close and just think of the words of this Palestinian poet, Marwan Makhul, who said, in order for me to write poetry that isn't political, I must listen to the birds, and in order to hear the birds, the warplanes must be silent. Thank you.